Hello, good people of the world. Welcome to or welcome back to my small channel. In this video, I'll be sharing with you the top 5 lessons I've learned from reading books alone. And these include the usual fictional novels, poetry books, and even theatrical drama scripts that I have accessed in the form of a book. These lessons are 5 gemstones in my life that I wouldn't trade for anything. I've ranked these lessons in no particular order as they are all so indispensable to me. So, without further ado, let's get headed right into the video. When books are erased from the world, what would be left of society? Perhaps you could expect an apathetic and completely unremorseful population of humans that would exchange their rank of priorities for much more trendy and commercial objects. The premise of empathy has been long cultivated in the realm of writing, stretching from the ancient old comedy theatrical drama of Lysistrata. I learned that when a collective thought was poured into a society with a collective mission, anything could really happen. The corpus of Lysistrata's story begins with a female protagonist named Lysistrata, who gathers the women of Athens and even Sparta to proceed with an odd plan of hers: commit a strike against intimate relations or intercourse. Lysistrata's priority in this plan was to stop the war between Athens and Sparta, also known as the Peloponnesian War, that would later be known to have spanned 27 long years. Aristophanes, the playwright of Lysistrata, was an ancient writer of the old comedy genre, a genre that lasted within ancient Greece's 5th century BC. In short, Lysistrata's actions, together with the women of ancient Greece, is founded upon the basis of empathy and sympathy for the warriors that had lost their lives on the battlefield and who have long been gone from the warm shelter of their loving homes. The end of Lysistrata occurs when the men of both Athens and Sparta agree to end the war in favor of intimate relations, or really intercourse. Lysistrata then presents a completely naked girl, symbolically named Peace, for the men to lust over and to finally finalize their depravity of intimacy with the girl. Now, let me say that this ending was expected, as it was the whole motive of the drama's plot, but Peace's symbolic presence remains unsettling to me at various levels. It is also assumed that Peace was an enslaved girl, something I heard from senior and intellectual sources, which boggles my head all the more. However, it must be remembered that this drama is very old. It's practically an artifact of comedies. English has been the lingua franca of the world, connecting people with different native languages through words of the same platter. However, have these words all been served in the same way? The short answer is no. Through colonial practices and globalization, English has disseminated through wide and narrow roads and has been cultivated to be used for different purposes all over the world. One particular use that I've discovered to be highly inspirational and magnificently beautiful is how language can be used as a form of resistance or reclamation in various books. The first book I'll use to exemplify my point is Joshua Whitehead's poetry book entitled Full Metal Indigiqueer. Whitehead is a two-spirited Oji-Cree writer whose pronouns are he, him. Full Metal Indigiqueer encapsulates the multiverse of words in a captivating way through multifarious forms of formatting, diction, and multimedia imaging. Whitehead's use of jumbling the normative structure of English into his own pushes the idea that he's reclaiming his language, especially with his unique and common insertions of Oji-Cree language. The poems housed in this book tells you a gut-wrenching story about the deaths of indigenous women, children, and communities that have been sadly put at the forefront of colonial tactics and the seizure of indigenous lands. Whitehead's stark and unapologetic portrayal of his own grandmother's murder touched me in all the deepest, darkest lobes of my heart. His words of reclaiming his family's sadness and of resisting the grammatical structures of a language that was forcefully imposed on his community was amazing and wonderfully inspirational. On a similar note, Witi Ihemera's Dear Miss Mansfield is a great adaptation of selected stories written by Catherine Mansfield. Both writers originate from New Zealand, where Mansfield was a celebrated writer during the early 1920s who lived in England most of her life, and Ihemera is also a celebrated writer during present times, whose identity is shaped by his Maori ancestry. The short summary of both these books is that Ihemera adapted a particular amount of Mansfield's famous works and carefully added a different perspective to her stories, one that was unique, one that was Maori, and one that was a great rendition of reclaiming the narrative. A great story that Ihemera adapted from Mansfield's collection of short stories was Her First Ball, that was adapted to become His First Ball. Mansfield's original story tells the tale of Layla and her first experience dancing at a ball with the insertion of various natural conventions of the time. Meanwhile, Ihemera's adapted work shifts the perspective of the main character to a Maori man named Tuta and his own first experience dancing at a ball. I was so intrigued by this adaptation that I actually wrote a paper for this phenomenal event for an English class in my first year of university. Here's a line from my paper that I must admit sounds a bit patchy and quite botched after tweaking it too much. Ihemera's His First Ball can be seen to represent this argument in a similar frame, wherein he states his power over the English language by his use of colloquial and unconventionally spelled English words. In this sense, Ihemera directly opposes Mansfield's inflated and correct use of English through his use of incorrectly spelled English words as seen in going for going, past for past, and house for house, in Coral, Tuta's mother, and Tuta's dialogue. Ihemera's ability to reconfigure the original conventions of the English language through his use of incorrectly spelled English can be seen not only as mockery over the natural conventions of the language, but it can also be seen as exemplifying Ihemera's power over the language. And that pretty much sums up my argument for this second lesson. If the world was devoid of color, it would undoubtedly be colorless and therefore deprived of all the beauty and all the wonders of the multi-shaded world. Similarly, if the world was devoid of voices or even sound, it would undoubtedly be silent to the point your ears are numb, and what was once tranquil and serene wreaks havoc with endless high-pitched screeching of the ears. But what if the world was devoid from books? What would we be without books? Would we still have the knowledge that was passed down to us like a heirloom? Would we still know about the lives of people in the other half of the world? Would we still know how to work out a math workbook? Would we still be able to create engineering marvels of the present era or even the future era? Where would our creativity go? That, my friends, is another lesson I've learned from reading books: the art of creativity. I still vividly remember the time when I was in 5th grade, sitting in my elementary school's desk chair, trying to rack up a set of opening words for an English short story assignment. I had nothing, and my brain was empty, so I opened the book I had always brought to school, and I flipped to the first page. And there it was, the beautiful opening line of the Famous Five's 6th book by Enid Blyton. I immediately jotted down the line with my own editing and by simply refining some of its edges to fit my needs. And voila! Lo and behold, I got a perfect mark on my assignment. Looking back at this memory, I am reminded of how language is, in all of its multifaceted ranges of words, a remix of what once was. You see, we are taught language from, most likely, our parents or guardians. They were taught by their parents or guardians, and their parents or guardians were taught by their foreparents or foreguardians, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of time. This act of passing down words, the conventions of language, and the particular enunciation of words that seems to roll effortlessly in the tongues of native speakers acts like an heirloom that is constantly modernized and refined to fit the needs of the present day and to better express certain events. I was taught this lesson by a great English professor of mine in the first year of university. This English professor took on this lesson with great gusto and with the help of Eileen Chang's collection of novellas called Love in a Fallen City. Chang's works, as explained by my professor, was inspired by Shanghai's cultural phenomena of modeng that was culturally relevant to Shanghai's metropolitan 1940s. Chang's works were extensively translated from Chinese to English, though she had studied English literature in Hong Kong. Her work taught me that borrowed cultures from the West could greatly influence our perspectives on various subjects in any part of the world, and even in our native homes. One great story that I still remember from Chang's collection of novellas is Red Rose, White Rose. The story tells the tale of Zheng Bao, who has a debilitating fixation on his friend's wife, Jia Rui, whom they called a foreign Chinese. Zheng Bao, however, then gets married to an altogether perfect Chinese woman, Yan Li, who he lacks affection for. Zheng Bao drowns his sorrows and dilemmas with prostitutes and heavy drinking, amounting to harsh actions on his part and his ultimate commitment to renew himself at the end. One thing that you must understand about Zheng Bao is that he was educated in London, where he picked up his undying interest in women with a foreign flair. This interest persisted with him throughout his adult years, and it ultimately became a problem for his broken household. I think this story can teach us the importance of moderation and how too much of one thing can result in a heavy burden for not just ourselves, but the people surrounding us. If we didn't have books, how would I have known such a creative story? Am I right? If you haven't gotten the hint yet, I love studying English literature and reading books. But there is this one theatrical drama that resembled a book but isn't really quite one that changed my perception of one's true authenticity. This drama was written by the famous Oscar Wilde and is called The Importance of Being Earnest. Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest tells the story of Jack, who has an imaginary brother called Ernest, to help him escape societal obligations that he would rather sit out of. Jack's friend, Algernon, also has an imaginary figure in the shape of his friend called Bunbury, who helps him flee societal pressures just like Jack. The problem arises when both these protagonists' lovers come into the picture, namely Gwendolyn for Jack and Cecily for Algernon. Both Jack and Algernon's act of deception marks their true value of authenticity as inherently flawed and chipped in multiple levels. The story reaches its climax when both Gwendolyn and Cecily think they're engaged with Ernest, as Jack has actually been disguising himself as Ernest in upper-class society, where Gwendolyn resides, and as Jack in lower-class society, where Cecily resides. Oddly enough, Algernon was visiting the countryside masked as Ernest, where he abruptly fell in love with Cecily and asked for her hand. The ending of the play was quite unsatisfactory in my opinion, as it lacked punishment for both Jack and Algernon for their acts of deception, wherein Jack found out his real name is actually Ernest, and therefore he wasn't wholly lying. And Algernon had actually been Jack's actual younger brother, which meant that he too wasn't wholly lying. The second example that I want to present is William Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. Shakespeare's Twelfth Night tells the tale of a girl named Viola who masks herself as a man named Cesario under the guise of her brother, who she believed perished in a shipwreck. The 17th century story was affected by the societal conventions of the time, where women did not have as much of a political or social standing as their countergender, men. As a result, Viola thought it best to disguise herself as a man and to work under Duke Orsino. Long story short, the Duke falls in love with Viola, who is disguised as Cesario, which is a massive problem, as a noble woman called Olivia had already fallen in love with Cesario, who is actually Viola. This act of deception again shows how Viola's inherent value of authenticity is very short from perfect, and brings upon more problems than intended to her platter of life problems. The ending, sadly, was also quite unsatisfying, as Viola finds out that her real brother, Sebastian, is actually still alive, which conveniently means Viola can be with the Duke and Sebastian can be with Olivia, as Sebastian and Olivia had fallen for one another beforehand. As jumbling as those two dramatic plays of past English canonical works were, they taught me indelible lessons regarding the importance of being your true self and of marking your authenticity with great value and priority so no one can mask themselves as you and the other way around. To end this list of lessons, I want to end on a hopeful note, as the last lesson is about hope. Ever since my mom came hauling back a stack of books from America at the ripe age of 8 years old, I began reading vigorously at a wild pace in fascination of all the glory and slumps that pages could bring to my eyes. I was and have always been astonished about how writers could bring the story to the depths of hell and bring it back up to a gleaming ending of hope. One of the most memorable books I read when I was a young teen struggling with my own personal debacles of life was Kathleen Glasgow's Girl in Pieces. Glasgow's Girl in Pieces made me understand the beauty of hope, no matter where your walk of life had originated from, and no matter where it would lead you. The story of Charlie's mental health struggle with glass shards and the wrong crowd of people made me feel for a fictional character in ways I had never thought possible. But Charlie's story ended with a loving group of people willing to accompany her on the journey of healing and on the journey of achieving her dreams. Books like Glasgow's and so many others like Helena Fox's How It Feels to Float sustained my teenage years towards a young adult life of fulfillment and wonder. Honestly speaking, if I hadn't been served books on the widest platter anyone's seen in the world by my very own mother, I wouldn't be here today doing what I love and seeking what I love. If it wasn't for The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, for example, I wouldn't have understood the power of one's voice to a group of people willing to listen, and I wouldn't have understood so many lessons on life. If it wasn't for No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai, for one, I wouldn't have known what I disliked and liked reading, and what I wanted to find in books for the benefit of my personal growth. If it wasn't for Dictate by Teresa Ha-Kyung Cha, I wouldn't have known that books could bring you to the deepest trenches of generational grief, and that translation may never land quite right. If it wasn't for All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven, I wouldn't have understood the importance of love in our world and the feeling of the greatest sadness one can endure. If it wasn't for You Will Not Kill Our Imagination by Saeed Tibi, I would have never discovered how intergenerational trauma can last so long amid safety and a sustainable shelter. If it wasn't for all the writers in the world today, I wouldn't have known the beauty of language and the beauty of sharing stories. Lastly, if it wasn't for books, these lessons would have never encountered me in this lifetime, and I find that a great inconvenience. Here is the summary of all the lessons I've covered. Don't forget, keep reading and never close the book before it's time. Thank you for watching and peace!